Okay, so for our last invited presentation, I'm pleased to introduce John Feland of Argus Insights. Already there in the right place. That's amazing. So John's company is Argus Insights. They're a market research firm. They're a member of the Embedded Vision Alliance. They have a very interesting approach to listen directly to what consumers are saying. And as a couple of our speakers mentioned, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how hard these problems are technically. It doesn't matter how cool the technology is. What matters is, can customers, in many cases that means consumers, can they use it? Do they want to use it? So that's what John's going to talk to us about. John.
Great. Thank you. Where to begin? Probably the first slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the things we've seen come across our bow wave recently. Effectively, what we do in a nutshell is we listen, though my wife may argue otherwise. And talk about some of the things we're looking forward to in 2014. Some things that we know will happen, mostly. We know there's going to be a Galaxy S5. Whether anyone cares, we're going to find out here in a month. We know that there will be a new Galaxy Note 4 probably in the fall when iPhone releases there. That becomes the pattern. One of the things we saw come out of Mobile World Congress is that there wasn't a lot of, this is our flagship phone, this will change the universe. They're saving all of that effort for the fall to try to compete with Apple, because the last thing these companies want to have is their flagship come out in the spring and then have nothing new to show when Apple comes out with their new stuff. So we saw less of that, though HTC's bucking that trend and Samsung's trying to in interesting ways. There will be more wearable products than there are people wearing them. That was one of the things we saw definitely come out of CES. They were putting accelerometers on everything, even small children, right? We're hearing more and more about that. And the proliferation of wearables between at CES and Mobile World Congress actually outnumber the number of craplets that we saw at CES. And so that's something that we're seeing in the marketplace shift too. The question comes, what are you wearing it for? That's one of the things we'll start to see unpack over this year as the Galaxy Gear Fit and the Fitbit and the Force that makes people itch and all kinds of crazy things are coming out in the marketplace today. What really about wearables is sticky? Because wearables right now is at that stage where it's like the Swiss Army knife that has 1,700 blades on it. It's got a fish scale or a corkscrew, a USB drive, a magnifying glass. It has all these things that you might someday use. The question is, what are those 2 or 3 blades that justify carrying this around with you on a regular basis? And we'll still let, TSA will let you board the airplane with. HTC One Up, One 2. Mobile phone naming needs a refresh this year. I don't think it's going to happen, though, right? We have the 5S and the S5. We have the 1, 2, Z1, HT. It's just crazy. LG G something, because the G2 has actually been very good. Right? It's actually been what's helped LG come back from the dead when it came to the smartphone marketplace. And then, of course, this year we have the Nokia Micro Android. I don't know. Was anyone here at Mobile World Congress? Okay, a few of you were. Absolutely amazing event, especially to watch it remotely from your armchair, because it means I didn't have to eat really good paella like you guys did. But to see the response to Nokia's Android announcement, in which it's a Microsoft operating system looking like an Android maybe phone right before we get actually ownership transferred to the guys in Redmond device. It confused the living out of everybody, except for the people that might eventually buy it, because they're like, oh, it has mostly the experience, but it's at a price I can actually pay for because I don't have the high licensing fees for the Windows 8 phone. Okay. And we know there's going to be some kind of iPhone 6-ish device in the fall sometime, right? Xiaomi will continue to disrupt everyone every week. If you don't know about this handset manufacturer, they release a new software every Friday. It's Groundhog Day every Friday, which is fantastic, right? It means you get a chance to react to what consumers are excited and disappointed at every week. Every week you wake up to a new device. Every week you get a new experience. Unless you like the old one, then you're in trouble. But that's okay, because wait a week, it'll change again. This is how they're disrupting the market with a quality handset with a differentiated experience. We tracked the launch of the iPhone 5S and 5C in China. So the 5C was supposed to be the phone for the rest of the world. Customers were talking about the 5S 300 times more than the 5C in China. That strategy didn't work so well, did it? This is one of the reasons why. And the last one, the U.S. mobile market's going to stop being interesting, right? It's kind of flat, saturating. For Apple to have such a rough launch in the United States and have the Galaxy S5 kind of go, oh. Now, this is actually the dirty lie on this first slide. It actually will become interesting because of the fragmentation. Because the U.S. market is reaching saturation, it's creating opportunities for people with different devices. Sony is back. For 3 weeks, for the month of February, the highest rated phones in North America included 3 Sony handsets for the first time in a long time. Galaxy S4 has fallen down below the Note 3. These are other kind of things that we can track. And actually, as part of being a member of the Alliance, you get our monthly smartphone report delivered in the membership area, plug for the EVA. So we can also talk about this afterwards. But those are kind of things we think are going to happen this year. Why? Because this is why we got started, right? When Steve launched this is what everyone was saying. Gartner called it a feature phone. Bless their hearts. It wasn't smart enough for them. And then the one that's really hard for Nokia is it's in its product, right? You can't improve what you can't measure. What they were missing is they were missing what was driving adoption of the iPhone. They missed how this conglomeration of what they consider to be lower tech parts. You can't copy paste on an iPhone. Who would want this? They missed how the sum of the parts was actually greater. I mean, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. And so that's what we do. We measure that in a way that tends to be predictive of adoption and sales. We've actually beat Wall Street estimates of iPhone and iPad performance almost every quarter for the past 2 years by listening to consumers. We focus not on what people sold, but what consumers enjoyed. And that gives us a peek around the corner as to actually what's driving adoption. It's kind of fun. But I tell you, you know that everyone has that friend that's a lawyer or a medical doctor, and at parties they come and ask them, so I got this growth, right? For me, it's, what smartphone should I buy? Well, what do you want? You know, we can tell you, right? It's like there's no one. It's if you've ever seen the TED Talk by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about the perfect Pepsis and the SpaghettiOs experiment. There's no perfect Pepsi. There's perfect Pepsis because consumers cluster. People cluster around their smartphone behaviors too. But anyway, so we basically measure the gap between what the brand promises. Some lie, some don't. The reality. Very happy iPhone guy. He's actually also runs Android Central and SlashGear, so he was kind of placed for that shot. And then what happens in the marketplace, because this drives a lot of what our companies end up doing, fortunately, unfortunately. We do that by collecting data from consumers and can integrate that with proprietary data sources. We analyze it, then we write reports and do analysis and stuff. Major shifts taking place. One of the major shifts that happened right before Mobile World Congress was this. Motorola switched hands. Google's A-B experiment chose A instead of B. Do we make our own handsets, or do we contract it out? So Nexus versus Droid. Who won? Google. That's who won. Though Motorola, as we'll see in some of the data later, is actually doing better right now. Lenovo ends up with the footprint in the United States, which is nice. But when you look at it, no one is talking about Motorola until this took place. We track all the major handset manufacturers in social. No one is saying anything. Customers were talking about Motorola. And then, poof, acquisition. Everyone's like, oh my goodness. And see the ramp up, all this Google Rolla, Lenovo Rolla, all this kind of things going around, and then it fades again. It faded all the way until Mobile World Congress, in which Motorola said, by the way, we're going to have a little party. You're invited. We're not going to really tell you anything because we don't know, but we'll tell you what we don't know. And when you see the sentiment, you know, Motorola in comparison just pales. Even around before the announcement, no one cared enough to talk about it. That's the worst thing that can happen to any brand or company is when the consumers cease to care enough to talk about you. At least you're being talked about. If you know, but it's improving. Just another comparison, about 1% of all Twitter data people actually share their location and coordinates. Think about the privacy lecture we heard earlier about from the good counselor. You can drill down and see where these people are in Google Earth. It's kind of disturbing. Now, that's the Motorola footprint. That's the Nokia footprint. So even comparing those two brands, who are both kind of being scrappy right now, they were kind of in trouble. What you see here is the volume of conversation is the size of the bubble. The place in X and Y is the delight levels, because satisfaction is not enough. This is actually based on the consumer review data that we pull in on a regular basis. What you're seeing here is those trends over time, and how in a week when Apple had 320 reviews, Samsung had 212, Motorola had a tenth. This is from US Mobile. This is a proxy for adoption. This is a proxy for sales. Very, very small amounts of people. This has changed in the past couple weeks thanks to Verizon. Some other things that we see, and we pull out the metadata, especially as it relates to vision and things of that sort. This is a graph of products being launched and looking at their CPU speed and the megapixel size, right? There's definitely correlations here on average. We're pumping these things up more and more and more and more. Batteries getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Prices are almost flat. Consumers are demanding more for less every step of the way. They're falling out of love with experiences faster than they ever have before, with a few weird exceptions. The Galaxy Note 3 is actually getting higher reviews in the past 3 months. People love it more than they did 3 months ago. Nothing's changed. There's been no major firmware updates. Something about the... Oh, yeah, they announced the Galaxy S5. Oh, I like the Note. That's great. Perception is being driven by what people see, what the alternatives to be. So, what happened at Mobile World Congress? What you're seeing here is kind of the net sentiment of the social buzz and the volume of conversation. And as to be, not to be surprising at all, Samsung has the bulk of the buzz. BlackBerry too, actually. BlackBerry had a very good Mobile World Congress for two different reasons. One, BlackBerry was trying to make a go at, talk about the new Jakarta, and people in Indonesia, as you can see on the maps, tweet more than anybody on the planet. I think 2-year-olds are tweeting in Indonesia. It's amazing. And then the new Nokia phones were being launched with BlackBerry Messenger integrated too. So now you see crossovers in the brand, where Nokia is helping out BlackBerry, as BlackBerry tries to figure out what to do about where they are on this footprint. Are they a consumer products company? Are they an enterprise software company? How do we make sense of all these things? And you can see the ebb and flow and how more people were announcing before the event than after the event, and who does well and who doesn't. One of the brands we were tracking is Acer, because they're starting to do things in phones in interesting ways in Asia. We need to spend more time with Lenovo and others as well. But what's interesting is to see how quickly it falls. How quickly do they fall? Does the market fall out of love in the conversation about these things? Like any advertising campaign, there's a flash in the pan, and the real test is whether or not any stickiness is achieved. Did you tell a story that consumers want to have a starring role in? Do people want to have eyeball recognition to log into their phones? Wait, let me answer this call. Oh, wait, I looked away. Crap. Think through those experiences, the could versus the should. So, Samsung, and this is kind of digging into the details of what happened at Mobile World Congress. The Unpacked event that they had was actually quite well received. A bulk of the conversation coming out of it was obviously the Galaxy phones, but you see a lot of people saying it doesn't seem appealing, not really interesting. The positive buzz was about the watches, especially the Fit. Again, more wearables and people wearing them. And the Galaxy Gear did really not so well when it first came out, but they're trying to do a refresh and understand those things and figure out how to build that ecosystem out. Motorola, their event actually had a little bit of buzz. They got more buzz with the Twitter event they had afterwards, because they saw that people heard about their party that they had and how little information was shared, that they actually had a really candid conversation over Twitter with people, talking about what they don't know and how they're not really sure about the future. We know we're going to have another watch. We know we're going to have another this. And the Moto G is selling more than even the original Razr did. So the Moto line has actually done well for Motorola, relatively. HTC had some good mid-range phones, but then said, by the way, wait for the 25th. That's when the real stuff's going to happen. After Mobile World Congress is when HTC started grabbing people's attention, saying that we're going to save the good stuff when it's only us to look at. Which is probably a pretty good idea, because HTC is in need of a win. Last year's Facebook phone went the way of MySpace. The HTC First was actually one of the worst launches we saw last year as a device, and the HTC One was their surprise hit. In fact, not only did they win from the GSMA, the #1 smartphone of the year, what we found in our data is that when people went to Best Buy to buy an iPhone, a lot of them, not the bulk of them walked out with a new iPhone. A lot of them walked out with an HTC One instead. Not a Samsung, not an LG, but an HTC One. So consumers see the HTC One on par with the iPhones. LG pre-announced, and it was a lot of, we're going to do some mid-range phones, please pay attention to us, then it faded away. The Nokia X drove a lot of controversy we already talked about in terms of the Motorola, not a Motorola, less coffee, John, less coffee. In terms of being the Android handset being purchased by Microsoft. It's very confusing for a lot of people. But it's going to work, I think. We'll see what the users actually say. This is looking at the kind of the EVA parts of conversations we're in Mobile World Congress as we're moving into the overall piece. Lots of discussion around cameras, a little bit about facial recognition, eye tracking, eye gaze, megapixels, and then you see the kind of the teal bumps in the midst of the blue? Selfies. Lots of conversation about selfies. In fact, 2014 is going to be the year of the selfie. This is really where consumers' minds are at when it comes to vision on handsets these days. It's about, I know, Vin's like, oh, are you serious? All this comes to this? All this technology, all this information, all this capabilities that we can track pigs on farms, and you're doing selfies? But this is where consumers' minds are today. You saw it in the output of Mobile World Congress. You see it right now in what's capturing people's attentions. It's about this notion of creating and sharing experiences. How do we capture what we're doing together, even if it may be sort of staged? That whole thing still is amazing. All of our data blew up around the house. It was like, what? Whoa! Oh, hey, Ellen. It was really interesting. Even the controversy around, she tweeted here with an iPhone and here with a Samsung and all this kind of, just roll with it, folks. So now I'm going to spend some time talking into what the current state of adoption is. Snaps. So the Mobile World Congress analysis, those aren't phones that don't exist yet. Right? It's all people with Twitter, sorry, bad pun, people talking about what they're excited about, what they could be doing. This is what they are doing. This is the kind of current state from a carrier standpoint. What you're seeing here is the average delight month to month. This is basically January to February, based on consumers reviewing products at these different locations, and this is the buzz volume down here on the bottom. That purple arrow going woohoo up and to the right, always a good thing to have on any 2x2, any MBA will tell you, is Verizon. Verizon has had a big surge in the past month with their way to kind of get people to re-up their plans and try to stave off what's happened with T-Mobile and Sprint's family plan, etc. And as a result, they've been almost basically giving away phones. Lots of phones. In fact, a lot of the phones have been given away. You can start to see here. Motorola is starting to kind of chase the tail of Apple. Apple's that little red one up and to the right where a lot of people really love their handsets. As a brand, it hasn't always been this way, but most recently Apple's been solidly across the board the top-rated brand in our data sets. But you can see people trying to nip at their tails. Motorola. Who'd have thunk? And part of what's been driving Apple's delight after such a bad launch with the 5S and the 5C is the same thing that's driving Motorola right now. When you drop the price to almost nothing, it's really nice to get a cool phone for free. We saw over a holiday, all the carriers and the retailers drop their prices on the 5. If you drove by Best Buy, they would throw a 5C into your car. They might stop to ask you what color you wanted, but for the most part, they just gave you one. And now people have them like, this is really cool for a free phone, right? Who'd have thought you'd have a free iPhone? And so that's part of what we see driving the adoption in the space. And you can kind of see this trend as people are kind of get happier and with the buzz increases. If you look at it across the different carriers, obviously Verizon is selling a lot of iPhones compared to everyone else. The one kind of phantom that we see kind of popping up a little bit, ZTE with the new Max is actually doing quite well at Boost. And so we're able to see how the brands are performing at the different carriers, what the perceptions are, and how that's driving the adoption, and who's doing what where. When we drill into it, because that tells you quantitatively, that's a 30,000 foot level. Who's ahead, who's behind, right? This is literally the landscape. Yes, sir. Sorry. This is sort of a contour map showing the volume of conversation around different brands and different carriers. And so the really heavy lines over here is like climbing up Pikes Peak for Apple at Verizon. Whereas the lower landscapes, LG at Sprint is doing pretty good as far as the Sprint, but they're slow. There aren't as many isoclines if you're a hiker at all. And so the contours are much lower for that. So the Verizon's driving most of the buzz, which has not been the case in the past couple months. That's why you see tighter lines and more lines for them. And you can see Samsung's dominance and Apple's dominance by seeing the fact that they've got more lines than anybody else. They really control the mind share. Yes, sir. This is reviews. This is consumer reviews. This is just volume. It's just volume. Good question, Ben. This is based on reviews from Sprint, from basically all these retailers, from Amazon, AT&T, Best Buy, Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, Walmart, and Boost. To those companies' websites, yes. Yes. So this is actually in the words of people who have purchased the phone and used it, not the experts. We find the experts actually off typically by 1 to 2 stars from the actual population. And it's the sentiment and the volume of conversation of the review data that tends to be predictive of sales. Other questions? I love questions. Does that help? Okay. So that tells you the landscape. Then we drill into the actual review data to see what people are talking about. What's top of mind? Surveys are great for getting answers to your questions, but it's hard to figure out the questions you aren't answering. So that's where our listening methodology works well with survey research, because we see what they're asking about. And what we see when they're talking about their photo-taking capabilities, it's not always positive over time. It's pretty flat. You would think with all the advances that we're making, that photo-taking would be like, whoo, up and to the right, like everything else, right? There's still gaps in the experience. There's still places where the combination of hardware and software and bandwidth and the ecosystem don't come together in a way that makes sense. There's still gaps. There's gaps in terms of speed. There's gaps in terms of focus. There's gaps in terms of how the cloud information gets synced. Think about other stories. Yeah, the time it takes to focus. And that's sort of the next slide a little bit, where we break it down a little bit more. Speed, actually, when things are fast, is a delighter. It takes fast pictures. But if you look at the volume of conversation around speed, it's a very small amount compared to the overall conversation around photo taking. Zoom is a detractor typically, as is anti-shake. Things end up being blurry, things of that sort. All those feed into the lower perceptions of what their photo taking experience is. The flash ends up being not as good as you would think as well. Some conversations around the front camera you would think would be a delighter, but for the most part, it ends up being a net. Let's see, I got a laser pointer. Haha. You know, this is the front camera conversations. Kind of a detractor from the overall piece. And that's the selfie engine right there. The selfie engine isn't working? This is bad. We saw it. Kevin Spacey was out of focus in the big selfie, right? And you couldn't see the shine on Julia Roberts' teeth as much. You know. Actually, that would be a great overlaying this information with that picture to figure out where the issues are. Anyway, so that's kind of the things that we see in the conversations. And behind all this, we can drill down to the actual sentences and stories that people are telling about what's driving them happy or sad, as the case may be. Any questions on this? Yes, sir. That's a good question. It ranges between tens to hundreds a week, depending on the carrier. Some carriers have a more engaged population. For example, AT&T customers almost never review iPhones. They did, partly because for the first 2 years they couldn't. By contract, Apple would not let people write reviews at the AT&T store. And you still can't review any Apple products at the Apple store. You can review Logitech, You can review Microsoft products at the Apple Store, but you can't review Apple products at the Apple Store. But we have found, and I'll show you the chart at the very end, where we've used this data to kind of correlate it to smartphone sales. It ends up being actually a statistically significant sample, a representative sample. One of the other things we found, because we look at tablets and stuff too, we were doing some research comparing German tablet users to US tablet users in terms of what they talk about. And web surfing is something that shows up in the top. But what I found really interesting is that the Americans talk about photo taking down here. And you've all seen kids at the hockey games with their iPads up, doing the game films. Turns out German consumers talk about photo taking much more. And it ends up being a little more of a net negative compared to their American counterparts. So that becomes interesting, right? We get these regional differences we can pull out in terms of how do you tell the story, what are the needs, and how they differ across. How does the usage scenario differ by culture, by location? Why is that? What's driving that difference? Movies and gaming kind of fall in the same order. Music's a little bit further down and things of that sort. Where they do things is a little bit similar and different. But these are all pulled from their conversations. This measures what's top of mind. This is not like we went through a survey and said, what do you do in the bedroom? And the NSA already knows. This is more about understanding what they're willing to talk about. And that gives you some measure of what's important, what works and what doesn't, and the experiences that are delivered today. And for German consumers, photo taking is more important than most things. And then basically the last slide. So the red line is actually smartphone sales in the United States. Handset sales in the United States is reported by NPD Group by month. And the blue line is what we predicted using our data, just by listening to what the customers say. So we get pretty close on understanding where the trends are. And we can do this by carrier, by understanding the handset pieces. It helps us. We're not in the business of doing forecasts like Gartner and NPD. They have great tools for that. We're more in the business of telling you directly where things are going. And we kind of look and see what's happening. We can kind of peek around the corner. And so we actually think that January is going to be not so great. February is going to be much better, mostly due to the giant sales that the carriers have been doing. So more handsets will have been sold, but at much cheaper prices, from what we're saying. And that's it. If you want to dive deep, I've got all the data. It's all delivered via a web intelligence portal. We're glad to show you at the table and see what's going on, and go from there. Questions?
Thanks.
Comments? Tomatoes? Cream pies? Whatever.
Thanks very much, John. Great stuff.
Go back to the selfie.
And we do have time for questions. Questions for John?
Back to the selfie.
So John, I have a question for you. In your research, are you seeing any of the vision-enabled functions, gesture recognition, or the gaze tracking, or any of that stuff getting even noticed by consumers? For example, I have a Samsung S4, and it has so many features. I feel like I would need an entire week to figure out what they all are and turn them on. So I just have almost all of them turned off.
And what we're seeing is that most people do. I mean, we did actually a study several months ago looking at the S4 in particular, and like the gesture stuff, the eye gaze tracker, the look away when you are watching Netflix, so it pauses the phone automatically. People talked about that in this data 5% of the time. So out of about 3,000 reviews of the S4, 5% talked about these advanced features. Yet, well over half, I would think close to 90% of all of Samsung's ad campaigns for the S4 talked about these advanced features, right? Your Swiss Army knife is going to come with these extra blades that you've never seen before, right? We're going to not only open your bottle of wine with a corkscrew, we're going to actually crush grapes for you, and we're going to give you a fish scaler, right? So they gave you all these extra pieces to it. Only 5% cared enough to even talk about it. And of those, over half hated it. And they hated it because it didn't work for them or it ate the battery. And most people, they find that these are interesting vitamins to add to the experience. What's the percentage of time I'm watching Netflix on my phone that I need to look, or YouTube, and need to look away and pause it? What's the cost of that? Battery life, usability, all those kinds of things versus the value of that. And they haven't done a good story about how that comes into play. The air gesture is a little bit the same way. You're doing Jedi mind tricks. This is not the call I'm looking for. It ends up being a little bit buggy for people. And if it doesn't just work, they're turning it off. Because the cost, they have to be able to trust it. So it's not there yet. What we find, though, especially like when in those reviews for the people that hated the eye gaze and some of the gesture stuff on the Samsungs, they wanted it to work. That 5%, the 60% that hated it wanted it to work. They wanted it to work for them. They wanted it not to eat their battery. They wanted what Samsung promised. So there is a demand within the marketplace, but it takes time for that to come across.
John, how about all the computational photography stuff? I mean, a lot of camera phones now offer panorama stitching. There's the whole imaging suite that Nokia has on its handsets. There's the selective post-capture refocus that the new HTC One is supposedly going to offer. Photography in a general sense is obvious. Do you see specific mention of those advanced things that are part of embedded vision?
We need to dig a little bit deeper on that to understand how people are talking about it. People talk about doing panoramas. They talk about the stitching pieces. They talk about slow-mo. Actually, their frustration with slow-mo is it doesn't work off the phone. That's the hard part. You take a slow-mo on your iPhone 5 and you all laugh and you see your kids go, right? And then you send it to someone else so they can see the same, and they can't. Because once you get off the device, that part of the experience is broken. And so, again, it's one of those things where they want to be able to create this type of experience and then share it, and that's where it breaks down. But I promise for the next event, we'll build out that capture around the photo piece quite a bit more, so we can actually talk to that. Sir? Right. Right. Right, because you've crawled up the learning curve to use the voice recognition. Then when your network's down and you can't use it, Siri itself was a novelty. It fell off the iPhone pretty soon after the 4S. In fact, when the improvements were announced during the 5S and 5C announcement, it got very little buzz. And so what we see when we track voice recognition over time, two things. The novelty wears off pretty quickly, and only people talk about it then when it breaks. But it's actually not a bad thing, because technologies that work really well, people talk about less. We saw the same thing with touchscreens. Touchscreens and early tablet and phone reviews, it just didn't, it says it will, and it doesn't. But over time, those conversations dropped. As the performance got better and better. In fact, I was talking with Ron earlier, the conversations that the battle for high-end touchscreens is done. They all work well enough. Now it becomes how do you bring that capabilities down to the mid-range or the low range of the smartphones. And so voice recognition is still something, you have Siri, which is conversational. My daughters love Siri. They don't like S-Voice as much. S-Voice is not as much fun. And then you have kind of the S-Voice and the Google search, which is much more utilitarian, right? It's less about play. The play tends to drive adoption more, right? Why did Palm ship a video game on their early handheld devices called Giraffe? So you could learn the alphabet. Now, you could give it a manual. They gave you that sticker to put on your Palm Pilot, or you could play a game. The gamification of learning helps a lot. And so that's one of the things they've done well. But, sir? It's a term feature, yeah. The Moto G is pretty cheap, right? And the new Nokia handsets and some of the other handsets that came out at Mobile World Congress make feature phones look like you should get them in a cereal box, right? You know, it's like, look, I got a prize in it. Every Happy Meal comes with a Moto G, right? I think feature phones are pretty much dead. Yeah. Right. Yeah, Xiaomi, yeah. They do well. It was interesting. So we've been pulling in China mobile data off and on for about 6 months now and kind of sampling that marketplace and seeing where they sit in the same methodologies. Samsung's in the pack with everybody else. Apple ended up being, because of their brand strength, quite a bit more, especially when you look at when they finally got over into the Chinese market and adopted. But Lenovo does really well in that market. And for everyone else, I need to go back and dig. It's been a while. It's been a few weeks since I've looked at the data. But we definitely have that information to kind of unpack it quite a bit more. I'll go here.
I have the mic, so I have the
you have the mic, yes. You have the crunch. You have the talking stick.
Yes.
Sir.
You have shown us some interesting data about phones. What about the apps? And do you see in the computer vision any trends of certain apps that have some new use cases that maybe will help us to do what kind of enabling technology on the chip or...
That's a good question. So the question was, what we've seen, well, you heard, he has a microphone. I think I need to go back and dig deeper on that. I mean, the things that we see are the things that everyone sees around Instagram and other types of things. The commitment I have for the next meeting and the next report that we do for the Alliance will include that information about the app piece as well. Because when people talk about imaging, they talk about the apps that they're using for that, what they're using for sharing it, et cetera, and what are the features that actually are driving that adoption. This cool thing, it means, you have things like the Walking Dead, Dead Again app. Have you seen that? Where you can turn yourself into a zombie, right? And then you share it around. And my then 7, now 8-year-old daughter did it and freaked my wife out completely. What? Where is that? Oh, she's playing with the zombie app. She's too young for the zombie app. That's okay. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. So I'll get more information for the next meeting. Sir.
What are your predictions about secure encrypted phones? Seems to be a new category coming out.
That's a good question, especially after Snapchat. I think increasingly there's an interest in the market in that space. I think the question is whether or not who's willing to pay for that, especially since everyone who promised to have secure has been revealed that they had a backdoor built in. I think there's not a lot of trust in the marketplace today. Having spent a lot of time in secure environments in the past in which no devices were allowed inside, I think the shift is moving. I think it'll gradually over time move from a corporate security to a personal security question. And then it becomes a question of whether or not people's awareness and education around privacy concerns will actually drive the adoption of those types of products. Because you can imagine a situation where I don't care what phone I use for my company, but when my daughters are 16, I want them to have the most secure device on the planet. And that becomes a different story entirely. It's a different way to think about it, I guess. I don't know.
Hi, do you have any intuition or data about what consumers want in futures? For instance, do they want stereo cameras or depth sensors on their phones? Or
we've actually have roughly 85% of the consumers are asking specifically for depth sensors. No, I'm teasing. That's a hard one, right? And I used to be in the component space. I spent a lot of years working on touchscreens. When people see what you're able to do with augmented reality, when they see what you're able to do when you add a depth sensor to these devices, that becomes interesting. When you have a story that they can have a starring role in, like we saw the Tango video in which, okay, we all got excited about seeing the voxels, right? And that rainbow level, and there's the ceiling. Look, there's the office chair. Look, there are on chairs over there moving across. But when they show the augmented reality of moving through the forest and having the deer come across, as if you're really doing that in the office, so you're holding up your tablet, like, what are you? Shh, I'm hunting the rabbits, right? That kind of experience is what gets people excited. If it needs a depth sensor or stereo cameras, cool. To the consumer, it matters not. Can I have that, get the phone for free, and have the battery still last at least 8 hours? I'll take it. So it's not that the consumers are asking for those things as much as we're figuring out whether or not they want those experiences enabled by those technologies. And so we'll see what HTC does with the stereo camera coming out, right? What are they going to do? Is it you're going to be able to create 3D selfies now? Oh, wait. Okay, we're all around you. So now we can go print out your 3D model of your group shot at Shapeways. Well, that could be interesting, right? On like 17 different levels. Oh, different selfies for different times. But And so I think it comes back to the scenarios that they're trying to support, the experiences they're trying to create, and how those are enabled by the integration of those technologies. At a price point and a power point, not PowerPoint, but a power consumption threshold that doesn't disrupt their existing experience. Because that's the thing with consumers. You can't disrupt their experiences. We talk about disruptive technologies and disruptive companies all the time as being bad things for companies. It's even worse for consumers. If you shift them too far, too fast, you'll lose them. That's what happened with Samsung with the S4. When the S4 was launched, we saw buzz for the S4, almost nothing when it first came out. You know what buzz went up? The S3. Because it suddenly became cheaper, and people saw no gap. Why should I get the S4 for $200 when I can get the S3 for $50? There's no perceived benefit for me to go to the S4. There's nothing that Samsung told the consumer about what the S4 enabled in their lives that they couldn't see themselves living just fine with an S3. And that's the key lesson in all this stuff. Other questions?
All right. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.